Hi, and welcome to Eagle Point Funding's special webinar on cybersecurity R&D federal funding opportunities. We're going to get started in just a minute, as we're at 12 o'clock Eastern on the dot. We have already companies. We worked with companies from around the world, and we see already today that we have companies from the U.S., Israel, Australia, Brazil, really companies from all around the world. And it's not surprising because first and foremost, cybersecurity is a global topic and a global issue. But also when it comes to the US federal funding, the US is investing in companies from literally all around the world because technology is a global village and developing technology is the interest of the entire world and the different countries in the world. So the U.S. is obviously interested in funding not just U.S.-based companies, but companies from literally all around the world. So without further ado, let me just introduce myself and Uriel Bar-Oz also. My name is Josh Bar-On. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Eagle Point Funding, and I'm joined today with Uriel Bar-Oz, who's our Chief Analyst. Today we're going to be talking about federal grants for cybersecurity related R&D. At first, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview as we talk about federal funding for all R&D projects, but we'll also start touching very clearly, very early on, different R&D related topics for cybersecurity. Once we go through the different mechanisms, the amount of opportunity that is really available, we're going to turn to Uriel, and Uriel is going to give an insider's look at what the market looks like for cybersecurity, the different agencies interested, and he's also going to give us a particular look at a number of different grant opportunities themselves. So I think the question I'm asked most frequently is how large of a scale are we really talking about? I think a lot of companies have heard about federal funding for small scale. Maybe you heard about city grants of $50,000 here, $100,000 here. So I think the number that I'm about to present to you may shock you a little bit. Just a few weeks ago in our last webinar, that number was $151 billion for 2018, which the federal government was investing in R&D. But as fate would have it, just a few weeks ago, between our last day webinar and this current webinar, the omnibus budget passed, shocking pretty much everybody in the US government as well as universities and private industry as a whole, as they passed a budget which was $20.1 billion more than 2017's budget. And this after we were expecting large budget cuts for R&D. So for the R&D world, a miracle happened, and $176.8 billion was suddenly became available to be spent all in 2018. Now, not all of this budget is going directly to private companies, but a large amount of it is, to the tune of roughly $60 billion. Now, we don't know the exact numbers, and then, with a bureaucratic system as large as and complex as the US government, it's tough to decipher, but we know, according to trends that we've seen in the past here, you can see on the chart 2016, roughly $60 billion is going to become available. So how much of that budget goes to cybersecurity? Now, this is looking at the federal government as a whole, not just R&D, but we see that there is a general trend of increasing expenditure on cybersecurity. The numbers you see before you of $13.1 billion in 2017 and an increase of $1.3 billion in FY 2018, this budget is including both grants as well as contracts. But a large amount of this money is going to federal R&D grants to fund private companies. And that money is not only available in one industry or two industries, it's literally spread out over all the different federal agencies. Maybe a little later on, we'll send you a link so that you can just check out the different expenditure by federal agency to see that literally every agency has a budget for cybersecurity. When it comes to R&D, the same is true. Not every agency, but many of the federal agencies, roughly 25 of them, have these R&D budgets, and a lot of it's going to cybersecurity. Let's take a look at one of those such agencies, DARPA. DARPA is a really interesting agency. It was founded during the JFK administration in response to the Russian government sending Sputnik to space, beating the US government. And JFK wanted to ensure that the United States maintains technological superiority in the world stage. Now, DARPA has a large budget, and we know that in 2018, $41.2 million of that budget is dedicated for cyber R&D. That's roughly 10% of DARPA's R&D budget being allocated to cybersecurity. And of course, this is excluding classified projects, which is going to be true as we talk about different R&D projects over the different federal agencies. It's hard to decipher what is available for different industries. It's something that our analysts and our team here at Eagle Point Funding tries to do literally every day as we recognize new opportunities. Cybersecurity is certainly one of those opportunities. And as large as the scale is, and that we can identify very clearly, this is always excluding classified projects. Just to quote the White House here, in saying the investment in basic research historically spurred innovation by the private sector. This pretty much sums up the federal government's approach towards funding private sector R&D. The government knows that by funding the private sector, they are essentially creating innovation which they themselves, as a governmental body, could never dream of doing. So now that we've identified that the scale of opportunity is very large for cybersecurity companies, let's take a look at what the quality of this funding looks like, as opposed to the typical funding routes that we all know. So bear with me for a second. We're going to have to delve into a little bit of terminology. There's dilutive funding, and then there's non-dilutive funding, of which federal grants is the primary mechanism of non-dilutive funding. So let's start to the left here. We have dilutive funding. This is the typical funding mechanisms that we all know of, such as venture capital, angel investors, bank loans, and all the ways that startup companies usually get the capital, or well-established companies allow to have future R&D projects which go beyond the scope of what they're currently producing. They're called dilutive funding agencies or mechanisms because what they do is they dilute both your equity or your financial control as well as your decision-making control over the company. Obviously, a venture capitalist invests money in your company, and there's an expectation or a legal agreement saying that there was going to be a transfer of equity long term. This also comes with a transfer of control because often venture capital or angel investors comes with additional advisors as well as board members onto your team. So you see that there's actually a dilution of control in the form of advisors and board members. When it comes to IP, that's a question mark. Different VC and different angel investors have different approaches, but IP is not guaranteed to stay in the hands of the researchers. Jump over to the right side of the column, non-dilutive funding, which federal grants and parents seem to be the only real non-dilutive funding sources. Here, there is no expectation or no demand or no whatsoever mechanism allowing for an equity transfer. There's no interference of outside advisors and additional board members, and all IP rights are maintained by the researchers themselves. So we see that the approach of the federal grants, the federal agency as a whole, is to not dilute the company itself, rather to empower them to conduct their research and bring their product to life. Okay, but it doesn't stop there because there's a way to leverage federal grants that goes far beyond the initial investment, which we've already detailed to point. Federal grants are viewed by investors as the hallmark of quality. And that's why it's not surprising that for every dollar that the federal government invests in private companies, those companies turn that $1 into $8.38 through private sector investments in the 8 years following the federal investment. Very clear here, federal grants are seen as the hallmark of quality, the gold standard of quality, and when private investors hear that you've received a federal grant, it piques their interest, and often they're going to come running, knocking on your door, and begging you for the opportunity to invest in your company. So now that we've clarified that federal grants are first and foremost a sizable opportunity, which is unparalleled almost in any other funding mechanism in the United States or around the world. We also know that that money is not just a typical investment, but it's a non-dilutive investment. And we know that money can be leveraged in a number of different ways. By the way, I didn't mention, but another way to leverage federal grants is a very simple mechanism, which is to use them to turn them into federal contracts. Because once the federal government knows about you and knows about the research you're conducting, they often are the first ones in line to become your first customer. And the crazy thing is you have the right to decline that offer should you not want them as a customer. But they are a big customer and they are a high-paying customer. So the question we're left with is, why is the government doing this? Well, first and foremost, the government has a vested interest in advancing knowledge and technology as a whole. It's not just the DARPA reasons to maintain technological superiority, but also they know that strong technology leads to a strong industry, and a strong industry leads to a strong economy. And this also leads to an improved quality of life for U.S. citizens. Regarding cybersecurity in particular, because what I said above is relevant for all R&D, but cybersecurity specifically costs the American economy between $57 and $109 billion annually. Now, that report that I just mentioned is from a 2016 analysis of 2016. The reality is in 2017 and expected in 2018, those numbers are only going to increase as cyber attacks become more and more advanced. So the federal government on all investments sees a ROI of $2.30. Now this was taken from the NIH, this number. Imagine what that number looks like for cyber attacks. When you're preventing cyber attacks and you're preventing that loss of billions and billions of dollars a year, the federal government is reaping an ROI that goes far beyond the number of $2.30, but we don't have any reports for that. The federal government sees that if you create a product, you're going to sell that product, they're going to collect taxes, you're going to hire new people to work for you, and in general, the economy is going to thrive. And that's what the federal government is interested in, both advancing technology and economic success for the country. So everyone should apply, yet for some reason, not everyone does. And the reasoning here is two primary challenges that companies face when they apply for federal grants. First and foremost, it's extremely difficult to identify opportunities. You can go to grants.gov, which is an incredible portal which has a lot of information, but it's not easy to navigate. And if you don't know the keywords and if you don't know how to look beyond grants.gov, then often it can be frustrating as you look for relevant grant opportunities in this multi-billion-dollar industry and you can't find it. Doesn't mean that the opportunities are not out there. Second of all, there's a low per submission success rate when you go at it on your own. The success rate per submission ranges from the single digit to the lower 10s, 11, 12%. Realistically, a company that doesn't have the time or the resources goes after this expecting to win on the first time, and this can be very frustrating. So what we've found in Eagle Point funding is that we have a 4-point formula which is really successful. And you can try to apply this by yourself, and you may find that you find very good results when you adopt this 4-point formula. The first is to know the federal system. There are agency announcements, and as well as publications, which you can use in order to understand what the federal agency are looking for. And so therefore, when you apply your search, you can focus primarily on those particular agencies as they relate to your technology. Second is you need to know how to clarify your vision and your capabilities. In order to find a funding route, you need to know what you want funded. And very simply, you need to have an R&D roadmap which takes you beyond this year and takes you 2 or 3 years into the future. The third is you need to identify not just one relevant opportunity, but you need to identify multiple opportunities which are a match for your R&D. The fourth, and I believe that this is probably the most important, you need to be ready to engage for a long-term multi-submission strategy, because as we mentioned before, the single submission success rates are relatively low, and you need to be ready to battle for the long term. A little bit about us. Eagle Point Funding is part of Freemind Group, and together we are an international consulting firm specializing in non-dilutive funding. We're the biggest of its kind in the world. We were established in 1999, just 20 years ago, and to date we have 70 plus full-time employees and roughly 250 active clients. We have 25 to 30% success rate per submission, but even that's not good enough because you need to engage in a multi-submission strategy. And when we do so, we more than double our success rate with 64% of our clients receiving at least one grant per year with a multi-submission strategy. This is our long-term approach, identifying multi-opportunities over a long term. And this has led to over $1.5 billion awarded for our clients to date, or roughly $70 million annually. We have a success-oriented business model, which we're happy to explain should you be interested. And now, without further ado, we're going to pass the torch to Oriel Bar-Oz, our chief analyst, as we talk about federal funding on cybersecurity matters in particular. Hi, Oriel.
Hi, Josh. So thank you very much for that introduction and the overview of federal funding. I hope everyone can hear me well enough. What we'd like to do now is go slightly further and deeper into the more technical aspects of federal funding. I'll try to do a short drill down, focusing more and more on specifically how the process works. So first and foremost, what you can see on the screen right now are some of the main federal agencies that we work with. I'm guessing that since everyone here is dealing in cybersecurity in some form or another, that some of these agencies might pop up in your mind when thinking about federal funding opportunities, such as maybe the NSF, which deals generally in scientific research, or even the DoD, although most people, when you mention the DoD in front of them, will think of traditional defense technologies and capabilities. However, some may think of the DoD, rightly so, as an agency that would also be interested in cybersecurity. We'll go a little bit further into that point slightly further into the presentation. But you can also see some perhaps unexpected agencies here, like the U.S. Air Force or NASA. And you'd be surprised to hear that they are also quite interested in supporting and providing grants, R&D grants for cybersecurity technology. So, without further ado, we'll go a bit further, a bit deeper into what exactly kind of funds these agencies have in terms of R&D budgets. So let's skip on to the next slide. Okay, so the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has about $840 million annually for R&D. We'll go from the lowest number to the highest number. So this is the lowest number, $840 million. The NIST has $1.2 billion. NASA has just over $6 billion, as well as the DOE. You'd also be surprised to hear that the DOE is interested in cybersecurity. The NSF is the next one in line with almost $8 billion, and topping the list with almost $15 billion is the DoD. So once again, these budgets are all taken out of the sources, the official sources you can see on the right, and also from the federal funding portals. So these are official numbers, specifically in this case for R&D budgets. What we're trying to show you here is that there is a lot of money lying here on the floor. The federal government is very, very keen on finding new solutions, new technologies, new tools being developed in the private sector to be supported by these budgets. So moving along, we'll take as an example the DoD. Simply since it's the one that receives at the moment, and also throughout history, the largest amount of money. The number you see on the screen is the entire cybersecurity budget. It includes R&D as well. 8.1 billion is not R&D only. This is the entire cybersecurity budget for the DoD alone. The DoD is a very, very relevant agency, since they are interested in well, almost any kind of technology that can advance the U.S. U.S. federal government's cybersecurity capabilities. And even though they are called the Department of Defense, they are not only interested in defense capabilities. What I mean is they also support countermeasures or cyber attack capabilities, counterintelligence capabilities, data analysis, and so on and so forth, or basically almost anything that has anything to do with cyber security. So what specific areas are the federal agencies interested in? I've gathered here for you the main topics of interest from the standpoint of the federal agencies. Obviously, these are not the only topics of interest, but they are the main ones. You can probably find, I bet everyone currently on the call can find themselves at least in one of the topics on the screen, and the calls for support are so wide and so detailed that you can almost always find yourself matching with at least one of them. So as you can see, threat assessment, offensive tools, like I mentioned before, situational awareness, both from standpoint of hardware development and software development, digital forensics, which is a very wide field, command and control tools, for stationary resources, and also for mobile resources such as armed vehicles and aircraft and the like. Next, we can see data protection abilities, data analytics and tools, visualization, AI, machine learning, deep learning capabilities. Also informatics, modeling and simulation, storage and access solutions. There is so much that the federal agencies are interested in. They are thirsty for new developments and new capabilities, again, both in offense and in defense. So moving along, again, drilling down a bit further and focusing our look a bit further. I've taken a specific announcement, a specific broad agency announcement, this time published by the NSF, and I've taken several, 4 of the main topics dealing directly with cybersecurity alone from this wider BAA, broad agency announcement. And within it, we can see this is almost a quote, but not a direct quote. This is a paraphrase of what they're interested in. So you can see next-gen mathematical computational statistical theories, also new algorithm data curation analysis capabilities, groundbreaking ideas for experimental or observational theoretical tools, also man-machine interfaces or machine-machine interfaces, high-speed network connections. So as you can see, these are only four specific topics from a specific announcement submitted or published rather by a specific agency, the NSF in this case. So as you can see, the descriptions are quite general. At times, it can seem daunting because it may seem as if it matches nothing at all or matches too many things at once. But what happens is that in many, many cases, the federal agencies are not quite sure themselves what is out there in terms of new innovative tools and technologies. So what they do is they use this tool, the broad agency announcement. They just fire it away at the ether and use it as sort of a fishing rod to see what comes up, to see what kind of companies, what kind of public innovative companies are taking the bait, so to speak, and offering their wares, offering their R&D tech and knowledge and abilities. That serves as a way for these federal agencies to find out what kind of technologies are on offer for them to support, and that allows them to then publish maybe a more specific grant proposal, a more specific BAA, a more specific contract proposal, and so on and so forth. Moving along to another example. We spoke about the NSF in the previous example, and maybe the NSF, as I mentioned before, the NSF, the DHS, even the DoD, maybe obvious opportunities or examples of agencies that would be interested in cyber. But what we can see on the screen here is a BAA issued by the U.S. Air Force. So when discussing, when mentioning the U.S. Air Force, most people will not think about cybersecurity. They will think about new capabilities dealing directly with the Air Force, such as new armament, new avionics, new navigational abilities, stealth abilities, even drone capabilities, and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, the U.S. Air Force deals with so much R&D and so much classified information that when you really delve into it, it becomes almost obvious that they would also be directly interested in supporting new cybersecurity capabilities, again, both in terms of offense and defense capabilities to safeguard their own very, very specific interests. So what you can see, again, from a specific and broad agency announcement, we've taken out specific topics dealing directly with cybersecurity. So you can see secure command and control methods, and you can see automated characterization and decoding of radio frequency signals, supervisory control and data acquisition systems. Again, you can see jam resistance, which may be obvious, but I bet not many of you thought that the U.S. Air Force would be directly interested in identifying and categorizing malware, for instance. And yes, they are specifically in this BAA. They are mentioning this specifically as something that they would be interested in. Also, industrial control system, as you can see here, as the last point. So what we're trying to show you here is that in many cases, you would not even, as a private company developing new technologies, you'd not necessarily even think about all the relevant federal opportunities that are out there, because it's not as obvious as most people would think that it is. So the Air Force, as well as the rest of the federal agencies, both the ones that we mentioned and others, are interested in a vast array of applications for, in this case, cybersecurity and their scope of interest. such as the Air Force's ability to safeguard their own information and facilities. So I hope that this very, very short, concise overview of how it actually works and what the federal agencies are interested in and looking for. I hope it was clear enough. Obviously, if it wasn't, then you can feel free to send us your questions. And now I'll give the stage back to Josh, who'll conclude the discussion for us with some more general information and discussion.
Okay, so first of all, like Oriel said, now's a great time to put questions into the question box, and we'll hopefully be able to get a chance to get to them in just a few minutes. Oriel, stay with us on the line for just another minute. Let's go a little bit deeper. You mentioned before a number of different topics which the federal agency is interested. Let's take the U.S. Air Force's broad agency announcement. Does that mean that the U.S. Air Force is going to invest in all of the different topics? Are they going to only invest in some of them? What does that mean when we see all those different, very broad cybersecurity topics which are out there?
Okay, that's a great question. So first of all, maybe a small clarification because this is not necessarily known to everyone. Broad agency announcement is not a term of ours. This is the official term that these federal agencies use to publish their interest in R&D grants. So what they mean is exactly what it says. It's broad. It's very, very general. This is the term that they use. As I mentioned before, they are not always quite sure themselves what kind of technologies they're interested in. And this is why they publish these very wide descriptions that include almost anything under the sun. And that means that you don't necessarily have to match all topics. You don't have to necessarily match several topics. In most cases, it suffices to match with even a single topic, as long as your technology is advanced enough, innovative enough. You can prove that it's not evolutionary but revolutionary. As long as you can do that, then you can even match with a single topic for you to secure the grant. And another very important thing that I didn't mention before when discussing the specific examples, and it comes to mind now following Josh's question, there are three main things, or the most important things, that you as companies that are considering applying for federal grants need to take into account. And these are, first and foremost, technological relevance. If you found yourself within at least one of the topics that we showed you here as examples, or you know and understand and are sure that your technology deals directly with, in this case, cybersecurity, then grants, federal grants are for you. If not, then they are not for you. So you need to really, really check and make sure yourself that you match properly with specific R&D grants in terms of your technology. That's the first point. The second point is budget. Each opportunity, each BAA has its own, you could say, minimum and maximum amounts that they would provide. So if you're interested in no less than, I don't know, $5 million, then you should look very closely into the opportunities found out there and make sure that they match with your budgetary needs. And the last point is deadlines. Even though BAAs are continually being renewed, closed and reopened, that is, you have to keep an eye out on the deadlines, because it does take an amount of time and effort from on your side to prepare the submissions themselves, to submit them and go through the entire technical process of actually submitting them. Also, you have to take into account your own deadlines, your internal deadlines for your company. So you have to take into account whether or not a specific BAA in terms of its dates is relevant for you. So again, to recap, technological relevance, budgetary minimums and maximums per BAA, and also deadlines per BAA. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but I hope I covered some of the main points there.
You know what I find to be so fascinating when we look at federal government and we look at the federal agencies is that we see such a large amount of the budget is allocated to the Department of Defense. 57% of the budget we know for cybersecurity going to the federal Department of Defense. And what's so fascinating is when Oriel, when our team goes and they find the different BAAs or SBIR or whatever grants we're finding calls for pretty much all types of technology, not just defense related. That's just in the Department of Defense. And then we see the same reverse happening in NASA, which is not just in space anymore. In fact, it's we have a lot of drones being invested in, we have energy projects being invested. Can you touch upon this a little bit more about what's the idea of this broad approach that these agencies are taking when it comes to investing in R&D?
Well, okay. What the federal agencies are interested in is revolutionary technology. So what they do, as we said before, they use this tool, the BAA, to cast a very wide net and try to snag as many interested companies as possible to find out about as many revolutionary technology opportunities out there from their standpoint. What they're looking for is internal R&D, and they're looking for a long-term roadmap. Also, a point I mentioned before is the technology has to be revolutionary, not evolutionary. In other words, if you have your R&D plan only includes improving on an existing idea or concept, then R&D grants are probably not for you. Also, they are not meant for manufacturing or for productization. They're meant for R&D. If all you do is integration, then it's a bit of a gray area. They are interested in new capabilities, new technologies, something that hasn't been seen before. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, although they'd probably be very happy to hear about that. But you do have to show that in your very specific field and under a very specific BAA, you are bringing something new to the table, something that will enhance and broaden the federal agency's capabilities.
Wonderful. Okay, we're just going to take a couple questions from our audience. The first question is, what is the average size of grants? I'll answer that pretty one-off. It's hard to know because grants, as Uriel mentioned, are in accordance with your budget, but the average size of a federal grant is roughly $1 million. Next question here is, do you need to be a US-based company in order to apply for federal grants? We touched upon that a little bit in the beginning, but maybe here I'll elongate my answer and say shortly, no. Longly, the federal government is interested in developing technology as a whole and developing it so it'll be available for their citizens. That does not mean that the technology has to be created only in the U.S. So that means that not only for non-U.S. based companies, but obviously those same opportunities are in parallel open for U.S. and non-U.S. based companies. However, we do find that the majority of the grants are available for U.S. based companies when you include mechanisms like small business innovation research, which is less open for non-U.S. based companies. There's a couple questions here regarding Eagle Point Funding's cost structure. You're more than welcome to send me an email. My email is josh@eaglepointfunding.com, and I'm happy to answer any budget-related questions. And there was also a question regarding the webinar, whether or not we're going to make it available, the recording as well as the deck. So we're going to be sending out the deck a little later on, maybe early next week. And regarding the recording, if you have a particular request, please email it to me, and I'm happy to send it to you directly. Before we say goodbye, let's just quickly recap how federal grants work for cyber R&D projects. First and foremost, we know that the scale of money is enormous. Grants are non-dilutive, making them a higher quality source for funding than the typical funding sources, which are dilutive. The pitfalls that most companies face when trying to go at federal funding by themselves is it's difficult to identify opportunities, and you have a low success rate per submission. Therefore, the keys to success are to first know the system a little bit, orient yourself a little bit with the system, the different agencies, and the different interests that each agency has, and you can learn that through the different agency publications and by going online and learning about it. Second, you need to really know your R&D roadmap in order to find opportunities which are going to be in alignment with what your technological vision looks like. Thirdly, you need to match between 1 and 2, knowing the system and the R&D roadmap, in order to find high chance opportunities with a plural, of course, because it's important for the last stage to engage in a multiple submission strategy, because this is a long-term approach which will enable you to maximize your chance for receiving high-level funding. Please join us for upcoming webinars. We're conducting a series on small business innovation research. Uriel today talked a little bit about broad agency announcements. SBIR is another mechanism for receiving federal funding, which is specifically allocated only for small businesses, also looking for innovative technology in all the different industries. So on May 9th, we're going to be doing our first of that series, and then on June 13th, a month later, we're going to be discussing going beyond SBIR, a look at the 97% of federal funding opportunities. If you're interested and you would like to talk to Eagle Point Funding further to explore the relevance of federal funding for your company, let's make a time to chat. You can either contact me through my Calendly, which is josh-bar-on, or you can send me an email directly at josh@eaglepointfunding.com. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing from you, and have a splendid rest of your day.